Prayer of Psalm 27. God is your light and your salvation. Introduction. The light that overcomes darkness. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Psalm 27:1. These powerful words of King David echo through the centuries as a beacon of hope for all who face life's storms. But to truly understand the depth of this declaration of faith, we must dive into the most controversial and challenging stories of the Bible, where we see how God works even in the most difficult circumstances. The Bible does not hide the complexities of human life or the controversial situations its characters faced. On the contrary, it presents us with raw and honest narratives that reveal how God's light can penetrate the deepest darkness of human experience. In these stories, we find not only moral lessons but also the practical demonstration of how God acts as our light and salvation. Abraham. Between the promise and the sacrifice. The story of Abraham represents one of the most controversial and misunderstood moments in the Bible. When God asked him to sacrifice his son Isaac, many question how a loving God could make such a request. Yet this narrative profoundly reveals the meaning of Psalm 27. Abraham was in the darkness of uncertainty. He had waited decades for the promise of a son, and now God seemed to be asking him to destroy that promise with his own hands. Yet Abraham trusted that the Lord is my light and my salvation. He could not see the end of the story but relied on the divine light that guided him. What makes this story even more powerful is that Abraham did not attempt to sacrifice Isaac out of ignorance or blind religious zeal. He believed that God could raise the boy from the dead if necessary. Hebrews 11:19. His faith was not blind. It was radical trust in God's nature as light and salvation. At the crucial moment, God provided the lamb for the sacrifice, showing that He never abandons those who trust in His light. This story teaches us that even when we do not understand God's ways, we can trust that He is our light in the darkest of situations. The controversy of this narrative forces us to confront our own limited understanding and trust in the divine wisdom that transcends human perspective. Job. When the light seems to fade, the story of Job is perhaps one of the most controversial in the Bible, for it directly asks why good people suffer. Job lost everything: children, wealth, health, and the understanding of his wife and friends. He found himself in the deepest darkness, questioning where God was in the midst of his suffering. During his trial, Job cried out, "If only I knew where to find him. If only I could go to his dwelling." Job 23:3. He desperately sought God's light in the darkness of his pain. His friends offered simplistic explanations for his suffering, but Job knew the reality was far more complex. What makes Job's story relevant to Psalm 27 is that, even in his darkest hour, he never completely abandoned his faith. He declared, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth." Job 19:25. This is a profound declaration that God is light and salvation, even when we cannot see Him working. The controversy of Job teaches us that God's light does not always mean the absence of suffering, but rather His presence sustaining us through difficulties. When God finally responds to Job, He does not explain the reason for suffering, but reveals His majesty and sovereignty. God's light is His presence, not necessarily favorable circumstances. David, the imperfect king under divine light. The very author of Psalm 27, King David, lived a life full of controversies. He was an adulterer, a murderer, and at many points, a failed leader. How could someone with such a history declare with confidence that the Lord is my light and my salvation? The answer lies in the understanding that God's light is not based on our perfection, but on His grace. David experienced moments of deep moral darkness. His affair with Bathsheba and the murder of Uriah represent some of the darkest moments in the Bible. Yet, when confronted by the prophet Nathan, David did not justify his actions or hide his guilt. Instead, he turned to God's light in genuine repentance. Psalm 51, also written by David after this episode, declares, "Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me." This is the essence of recognizing God as our light and salvation, not because we are perfect, but because He can cleanse and restore us. David's story shows us that even the most imperfect people can experience divine light. His failures did not disqualify him from God's presence. Instead, His experiences with forgiveness and restoration made him even more aware that God is truly light and salvation. Gomer and Hosea, unconditional love in darkness. The story of the prophet Hosea and his wife Gomer is one of the most controversial and uncomfortable narratives in the Bible. God commands Hosea to marry a prostitute and remain faithful to her, even when she repeatedly betrays him. This story is a powerful allegory of the relationship between God and Israel, but also reveals deep truths about how God is light and salvation. Gomer represents humanity in its fallen condition, constantly turning away from God in search of other lovers, whether idols, worldly pleasures, or anything that promises satisfaction outside of him. Hosea represents God, who continues to love and seek restoration of the relationship, even when we are unfaithful. The most controversial aspect of this story is that it challenges our conventional understanding of justice. Why does God continue to love those who reject him? Why does he not simply abandon them to the consequences of their choices? The answer lies in God's nature as light and salvation. God's light is not only judgment that exposes sin. It is also grace that offers redemption. God's salvation is not only deliverance from consequences. It is the full restoration of relationship. Through the story of Hosea and Gomer, we see that even in the darkest depths of spiritual unfaithfulness, God's light still shines, offering a way back home. Jonah. Running from divine light, Jonah's story presents a reluctant prophet who tries to flee from God's will. When God calls him to preach to Nineveh, Jonah flees in the opposite direction, boarding a ship bound for Tarshish. This decision leads him into literal darkness, first in a storm at sea, then in the belly of a great fish. The controversy in Jonah's story lies not only in its supernatural elements, but in its theological implications. Jonah did not want God to show mercy to the Ninevites because they were Israel's enemies. He preferred their destruction. When God forgave them after they repented, Jonah became angry. This narrative reveals an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes we ourselves try to limit God's light and salvation. We want his mercy only for those we approve of. But Jonah's story demonstrates that divine light is universal. It shines on the righteous and the wicked, on friends and enemies alike. In the belly of the fish, Jonah prayed, "From the depths of the grave I called for help, and you listened to my cry." Jonah 2:2. Even in his self-inflicted darkness, he recognized God as his salvation. God's light reached Jonah even in the depths of the sea, just as it reaches us now, no matter how far we may have run. Paul. From persecutor to proclaimer of the light. The transformation of Saul into Paul represents one of the most dramatic demonstrations of how God is light and salvation. Saul was a fierce persecutor of Christians, sincerely believing he was serving God by destroying the early church. His conversion on the road to Damascus is controversial because it challenges our notions of who is beyond redemption. When the literal light of Christ shone upon Saul, it blinded him physically but opened his spiritual eyes. The irony is profound. He lost physical sight to gain spiritual vision. God's light not only saved him from eternal condemnation, but transformed him into the greatest missionary in Christian history. Paul's story is controversial because it suggests that even those who actively oppose God can be reached by his light and salvation. No sin is too great, no opposition too fierce, to place someone beyond the reach of divine grace. This truth challenges our prejudices about who deserves forgiveness and salvation. After his conversion, Paul wrote, "For God, who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory displayed in the face of Christ." 2 Corinthians 4-6. His own experience made him a powerful witness that God truly is light and salvation for all. Peter. Between denial and restoration, Peter is one of the most complex and relatable characters in the Bible. Impulsive and passionate, he often spoke before thinking and acted before considering the consequences. His greatest failure came during Jesus' crucifixion when he denied knowing his master 3 times. This denial represents one of the darkest moments in Peter's life. He had promised to die for Jesus, but when the moment of truth came, fear overcame him. The darkness of cowardice and denial completely engulfed him. Many in his place might have given up the faith, considering themselves unworthy of restoration. Yet Peter's story powerfully demonstrates how God is light and salvation. After the resurrection, Jesus did not reject Peter or publicly humiliate him. Instead, he created an opportunity for restoration. 3 times Jesus asked Peter if he loved him, giving him the chance to affirm his faith as many times as he had denied it. The controversy of this restoration lies in its apparent injustice. Peter failed at the most crucial moment, yet he was still restored to leadership. This challenges our notions of merit and consequence. God's light not only exposes our failures, it offers redemption and new opportunities. Mary Magdalene. Delivered to serve, Mary Magdalene is often misunderstood in popular culture, but the Bible presents her story as a powerful testimony of deliverance. The Gospel of Luke tells us that Jesus cast 7 demons out of her, representing a complete and radical liberation from spiritual darkness. The controversy surrounding Mary Magdalene often overshadows the true message of her story. She represents all those completely dominated by darkness, whether through demonic possession, addiction, or any other form of spiritual bondage. Her deliverance demonstrates that no situation is too desperate for God's light to reach. After her deliverance, Mary Magdalene became one of Jesus' most devoted followers. She was present at the crucifixion when many disciples fled, and she was the first to witness the resurrection. Her transformation from a demon-possessed woman to the first witness of the resurrection vividly illustrates how God is light and salvation. Mary Magdalene's story teaches us that our past condition does not determine our future potential in God. The divine light not only frees us from darkness, it empowers us to become bearers of that same light for others. The adulterous woman. Grace in the moment of condemnation. The story of the woman caught in adultery represents one of the most powerful encounters with God's light and salvation. Dragged before Jesus by the Pharisees to be stoned according to the law, she found herself in the darkest moment of her life, facing not only public humiliation but imminent death. The controversy of this story is multifaceted. First, where was the man? The law required both adulterers to be punished, yet only the woman was brought, revealing the hypocrisy and sexism of the society. Second, the Pharisees were not truly concerned with justice. They were using the situation to trap Jesus in contradiction. Jesus responds in a way that perfectly reveals how God is light and salvation. His light exposes the hypocrisy of the accusers. Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. One by one they left, confronted by the light of truth about their own condition. Then Jesus offered salvation to the woman. Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. He did not minimize her sin but offered forgiveness and a new chance. This is the essence of God, as light and salvation. He exposes the truth of our condition, but offers grace and transformation. Practical application of Psalm 27. All these controversial stories converge into one central truth. God truly is our light and salvation in every circumstance. No matter how dark our situation, how deep our sin, or how complex our circumstances, God's light can penetrate and His salvation can reach. When David wrote, "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear?" he was not denying the reality of darkness. He had experienced persecution, guilt, betrayal, and war. But through all these experiences, he discovered that God was a reliable source of light and salvation. God's light works in many ways in our lives. Sometimes it exposes areas that need change, as it did with David after his sin with Bathsheba. At other times, it provides guidance in moments of confusion, as it did with Abraham. Often, it offers hope in times of despair, as it did with Job. God's salvation is also multifaceted. It includes deliverance from difficult circumstances, as in Jonah's story. It offers forgiveness for past sins, as seen in Peter's restoration. It brings complete life transformation, as in Paul's conversion. Praying Psalm 27 today. In light of these biblical stories, we can pray Psalm 27 with greater depth and confidence. When we declare that the Lord is my light and my salvation, we are aligning ourselves with a truth that has been tested through the centuries by people in every imaginable situation. This prayer is not only for moments of crisis, though it is certainly powerful in such times. It is a daily declaration of our dependence on God and our trust in His character. It is a reminder that, regardless of our current circumstances, we have a God who is both light and salvation. When we face situations that confuse us or challenge our faith, we can remember these biblical stories. They show us that God has a track record of working in complex and controversial situations, always remaining faithful to His character as light and salvation. Conclusion. Living in the light, the controversial stories of the Bible were not included to shock or confuse us, but to show the breadth and depth of God's love and power. They reveal that there is no human situation, no matter how complex, dark, or controversial, in which God cannot be light and salvation. When we pray Psalm 27, we are not making a statement of blind optimism or denial of reality. We are affirming a time-tested truth about God's character. We are standing in the tradition of faith that includes imperfect patriarchs, fallen kings, reluctant prophets, and disciples who failed. God's light still shines today with the same intensity as it did in the lives of Abraham, Job, David, and all the other biblical figures. His salvation remains available to all who seek it, regardless of their past or present circumstances. May we live each day in the confidence that the Lord is our light and our salvation, knowing that this truth has sustained God's people through all ages and will continue to sustain us as we walk in faith, hope, and love.